Hi, and welcome. This is Tasting Terroir, a podcast that's sponsored by Regenerative Inc. I'm Jill Clapperton, the owner of Regenerative. This podcast is really designed to make the link between how we grow food and the nutrient density of food, or how good is the food really for us? Flavors, all those aspects of food. And we know that you can taste how we've managed the soil and the food. And so this is really focusing in with farmers who are growing food in a way that's totally in line with nature, which is better for the planet, better for us, better for our animals. And as we say at Rise of Terra, healthy soil for a healthy world. Welcome, everybody. I'm Jill Clapperton, and we have Bob Quinn with us today. Bob is a farmer. He is an author. He is an entrepreneur. And now he is the director of a new research institute, the Quinn Institute. And we're really happy to have Bob on today. We have known each other for probably close to 30 years. Since I was a young scientist at Ag Canada, Bob and I have shared a lot of the same interests over the years, not just farming, but also genetics, but also, oh, and I forgot to say that, you're a scientist too, PhD in plant biochemistry from UC Davis. But we have shared this same common interest in how do we farm the soil in such a way as to have nutrient-dense food.
Yes.
And how can we use that nutrient-dense food to really improve the health of our communities and the planet and people in general, as well as our livestock, right? Because when we grow multi-species covers and things like that, I want you to tell us a little bit more about what you're doing with the Institute and how you came to form an institute.
It was a dream I've had for, oh gosh, I don't know, 10, 15 years or so. And when none of my kids came back to take over the farm, I decided to turn it into reality, because if your kids are coming back, you can't take, a big chunk of the farm and say, this is off limits for you. But if they're not there, I didn't want that situation where, after we died or sometime the farm was sold and then all the money went to the kids, ruined their life like money does. So we decided to avoid that and use a good share of the farm and turn it into a regenerative organic research, education, and health institute. And so we just got started. This is ending our first year of really research. We formed it last year. During the summer, we had a get together with friends and scientists from all over the country who came and gave us ideas and their 2 bits. And we took a lot of suggestions and put together a white paper, which I sent to you.
Yeah, and I'm looking at it right now.
Anyway, we tried to outline our vision for the whole thing. Our vision is to help grow high nutrient-dense food to heal the earth, heal our communities, heal our farms, but also heal the people that live here and eat the food that they're eating now, which is in many cases leading to chronic disease. Our country now is plagued with 60% of our population has at least one chronic disease. We're the sickest country in the world, and yet we have the greatest agricultural infrastructure. But unfortunately, it's been turned into an industrial base for just growing tons of food without really focusing on nutrition. Some of that industrialization has been to the detriment of nutrition. And some of it, like with extreme highly processed foods, things have been added that actually deteriorates our health, and it's not good for our health. We have a decline in nutrition, and we have an increase in residues and additives, which actually detract from our health. And so we're interested in helping to avoid both of those.
But this is a research farm, right?
It's more than just a farm. So, Jill, what we want to do in one place is show people how you connect, starting with good seed, into healthy soil, producing good food. And then we want to have a teaching kitchen and small processing facilities where we can bring people in and actually provide the meals right off of the farm. And so they see the transformation in a very simple way of what we can grow to what you put on your table. We hope to have a small flour mill so we can grind grain into flour and make breads and pastries and that sort of thing. We hope to have some small meat processing facilities so that we can take chickens or pigs or something, small animals particularly, from the field onto your table eventually. We want to have a health component which would support physicians who specialize particularly in disease, which is like diabetes, heart disease, those kinds of things that are chronic, and prescribe to them not pills from the pharmacy, but food from the farm. And so they can see, particularly from the beginning to the end, the importance of the whole chain. And so many people go through life without really a concept of from the beginning to the end of how their food is produced and what they're putting in their mouth. And so we thought it would be very unique and helpful. They could see it from the beginning to the end. So that's why it's not just a farm. The farm is a very important component, but we want to go on from there. We want to start earlier than some people start thinking, and that's with the seed and the soil preparation and how we prepare for seeding the crops. We prepare and start to nourishing our soils a year or 2 years or 3 sometimes before the actual food crop is planted. So we're planting crops for sale and we're planting crops for soil. And all those things go together. And that's what we're trying to show, the best way to put those together. And of course, you and I have talked about different ideas on that subject for years and years.
Yeah.
And it's still, for the Northern Great Plains, where we're located in north central Montana, it's still a question that hasn't really been fully understood. And there's not a magic formula, but we want to have principles that we can teach other farmers that they can adapt. All over, particularly, we're looking at the short grass prairie of the Northern Great Plains, which is southern Alberta, where your home was when you're in Lethbridge, across to southern Saskatchewan, down to western Dakotas, about halfway through the Dakotas, and then up going west to the Rocky Mountains, so eastern Montana, and then little bits and pieces of Colorado and Wyoming and Nebraska before the rain starts increasing, where they can grow
Before
corn.
I see more of a moist grass prairie and the tall grass prairie.
That's right, the tall grass prairie. And in that place, they can grow corn. So we know that when we're in the corn country, we're out of short grass prairie.
Yeah. And then also to include, as we go into Saskatchewan and Alberta, the mixed grass prairie as well, which is
that's right,
a cool season prairie. So there's lots of opportunity there for sure. So one of the things we talked about, well, you talked about nutrition and whatnot. So I'm going to say that I didn't start at the beginning with Kamut International and your seed breeding and your interest in seed breeding.
Yeah, actually, Jill, that was what really introduced me to the idea of food as medicine. I didn't go to school and learn that idea, or that didn't come to me. We were focusing on organic production, and it was trying to be done in a regenerative way, using legumes primarily as our cover crops and soil building crops in between each year of in Montana. And this part of the world, the shortgrass prairie, we can only grow a crop for sale every 2 years anyway. So what do you do with the ground while you're saving up the moisture? Most people traditionally just black fallow. That means they just worked it over and over all summer and then hoped it didn't blow away. Yeah, and then but it did blow away. But people have done away with those. And now they've introduced Roundup, a chemical spray which kills everything, and they call that chem fallow. So they're not tilling the ground anymore, but they're putting poison on it 6 or 8 times a year. And if you add the before and after seeding, it's even more. And now we have Roundup so contaminating our environment. We have it in our rain right now that falls on our farm. So that's a short-term approach that was a lot of excitement over. And of course, people are making billions of dollars off of this that make Roundup. But it's really time to look at alternatives and try to live without poisons or grow food without poisons.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing. And if we think about organic food, people want organic food because it doesn't have any pesticide residues on it. And it's what we could call maybe cleaner food. But I've noticed in the paper, you talk about being a regenerative organic farmer. And we all know the term regenerative has become very sexy these days.
Yeah.
And it's something that a number of us have been doing for a very long time, which is rebuilding our soils and really focusing in on soil health.
That's a really good question. And the trouble is with regenerative now, there's no legal definition. So it has been co-opted by people that we wouldn't consider regenerative really in how we think of them, but by all kinds of groups. And that's why I really like the idea of putting organic together with regenerative and combining it and calling it regenerative organic, because organic's already defined. And if you add regenerative to it, then you are really focusing on, in my mind, on soil health, because most of regenerative, whether or not they use any chemicals or whatever they're doing, most of the focus is on soil health. And if you combine that with organic, some organic operations, let me back up and say it this way. In my mind, the difference between organic and chemical agriculture was primarily that we focused on feeding, as organic farmers, we focused on feeding the soil. In chemical agriculture, the focus is on feeding the plant. So you decide what the plant needs, and then you buy that and you put it on the soil. The soil really isn't anything but just to hold the plant up and keep it from blowing away. But anyway, you feed the plant, and that's what you focus on. And when I first started converting to organic, what I was taught by my mentors was that the focus is on feeding the soil and the health of the soil. And if the soil is healthy, it feeds the plant, and everything works. And your nutrition on the plant then is increased, and the health of the people that eat it is increased. So everything is improved. But now, and that I call that the regenerative organic model. But if you have the industrial model of organic, and this is what really frightens me and concerns me, that the industrialization of organic agriculture, and that is starting to come in with first a different mindset, a mindset that you can feed the plant, but you can do it organically. And so I'm glad you're not using poisons, but I'm not happy that you're focusing on feeding the plant again, because we should really be focusing on feeding the soil. And when you combine those two ideas, then you have the best of both worlds. So in my mind, organic without regenerative is just as a shortfall as regenerative without organic. To really hit the best of both worlds, I think we should need to put them together. We need to put those two ideas together in a way that really defines what we're doing in both cases, because organic is also not totally defined on how much soil building and how you should do it. And that's what I'm concerned about.
Okay. Obviously, we have always shared the same concerns, because my focus has always been on rhizosphere ecology and the plant root zone and how we build healthy soils and healthy productive soils. And I agree. And it's really obvious that the model is more based on soil health, abundance, like productive soils, but not abundance for the sake of abundance. And so that balance where you have abundance and quality, because the other thing is, I think what's important is that we need to maintain some kind of productivity, no matter what.
Yes, that's right. Otherwise, we broke. The farmers are who's going to feed the world.
Farmers
all broke.
Yeah, but at the same time, we need more quality involved in this food, because you want to just eat a bunch of calories. And a lot of the nutrition models are based on calories, and that's a problem, because we don't need just calories. We need real nutrition, which is mineral nutrients and amino acids and vitamins and antioxidants that are really good for us.
And they have inflammatory properties. And we had no idea about that, Jill, until we started with our research project. And that's how we got started on this conversation, that with Kamut, comparing ancient wheat with modern wheat. And the biggest difference we saw was in inflammation. The diet of ancient wheat for people who had chronic diseases like diabetes and irritable bowel syndrome and heart disease, and all kinds of chronic diseases. And these are double-blind crossover studies. So people ate one either ancient grain or modern grain, and they didn't know what they're eating. Then they were on a washout period for 6 weeks or so, and then they crossed over and they ate the other diet for 6 or 8 weeks. And so it was a very well-controlled study, and it was very consistent that they're eating organic grain. So it wasn't a question of, are there residues, pesticide residues on this or not? The only difference was it a modern wheat or an ancient wheat. Modern wheat has been bred for great yields, is what you said, by making it shorter, by making it more disease resistant, by all kinds of things. But no one ever looked at nutrition. And I think that there's been some things lost. So either there's been things lost, or there is things added with all these other things that they were doing. They made the gluten stronger so they can make more bread with less wheat, because you can have more air in the bread because the gluten is stronger and holding in that air. So that was a difference in the makeup of it. So now 20% of the population, in at least America, can no longer eat wheat without some kind of a difficulty. So that tells you right there that something has gone a little bit wrong. But we were astonished to find that it wasn't something, it's more than just the gluten. So when you had people reducing their inflammation with these chronic diseases just with a different diet, that started me on the whole idea that, well, maybe food is medicine, like Hippocrates said 2,300 years ago.
Okay, that might be a little long.
It was something that was taught in the ancient world of Greece. And in the last, since modern times in the end of World War II, and we really went into the industrialization of agriculture and food in a big way. And it was a goal of this country that we would never be hungry. And so the goal was maximum production, abundance, and cheap food. With the government's help, we achieved that goal. But a little side effect that no one thought about, and people doing the work, they had no idea. They weren't doing this on purpose to say, yeah, we're going to sacrifice nutrition for this. No, nobody thought about that. It was not an issue. And all of a sudden, here we are sick. We're all 60% of us are sick. And the CDC says that 60% of that is due directly to the diet that people are eating. And so no one thought that there would be such a fallout that there has been. And that's why now I'm not the only one talking about this. There's all kinds of people talking about
It's a hot topic these days.
Yeah, after the election now, Kennedy says he's going to bring back the health of America. He's talking about looking at organically grown food and the quality of nutrition rather than just more and more pills that don't heal you. They treat symptoms, but they don't go to the root cause. And we really need to get to the root cause of some of these really awful diseases like autism and some of this stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of, I know I hear a lot of physicians and people who have a lot of influence talking about food as medicine and how food has all these anti-inflammatory, anti-aging, a lot of different properties, and mental health too, like affects mental health.
That's right.
And it mostly because it's like I've studied, which is the rhizosphere and all the microorganisms, it's that gut microbiome.
Yeah.
And feeding it. And just like everything else, it doesn't like to eat crap.
Yeah, that's right. And Jill, did you ever think all the studies you did with the mycorrhiza and everything, did you ever think, when did it start to dawn on you? Because I'm sure it did pretty early. When did it start to dawn on you that the microbiome of the gut is just almost identical type of thing as we don't call it that, but the microbiome of the soil? And they both are functioning so similarly. And
yeah, they are. They're
talk
both
about that.
digesters. Actually, it came pretty early because so the person, when I came to Ag Canada, the person whose lab I inherited was Dr. Michael Hines. And he'd been working on rhizobium and these other things. And he had a postdoc. And his postdoc said to me, he said, Jill, I think what we should work on is a biological pill to re-inoculate everybody's gut. And I'm sorry now we didn't do it because, man, we would have made a lot of money.
That's right.
But instead, he worked on inoculants for silage for animals because it was easier to do. It was something that we understood more. Like we understood more about the rumen microbiology.
Yeah.
Even the rhizosphere, we knew what was going on in the rhizosphere. And the work that I had done looking at how when we have plants when we have plants colonized by mycorrhiza, we have all this more mineral nutrition in the plant. I got it fairly early on.
Yeah.
But it was like what to do with it. I remember and I went to a conference in the early 90s where I met Ross Welch and Jerry Coombs. And I was a new scientist. I think I was like 2 years into the job out of a PhD. And it was at the University of Boston, actually. Yeah. And so it was the first time I'd come to Boston. And I was astounded. It was supposed to be about crop production and nutrition. And it wasn't. In fact, people didn't understand anything about crop production. I wasn't the only one who was there. Like everybody was talking market gardens and people buying food. And it was very urban oriented and not production oriented. And we said, wait a minute, nobody that we're working with is going to sell into a farmer's market.
Yeah, that's right.
People from California who were like growing acres of broccoli and cauliflower and things like that. And they were just trashing that model. Everybody has to grow their own food. And the truth of the matter is, we can't feed everybody if everybody has a backyard garden. I'm not really all that good at programming, but I'm really good at growing something. We all have the things we're really good at. And so having everybody just being responsible for their own food, there's a reason why we have cooperatives and we had farms where other people were taking over, because we need that. It came to me pretty early on, and it also really linked up to me with organic matter, like really understanding that the most biologically active zone of the entire soil is that root area. And then I started to really understand that what plants I grew changed the mycorrhiza, changed the whole root microbiome, changed the nutrient density of the plants. I saw that where we changed the whole mineral nutrient density. I remember asking people in nutrition, I go, what should I be measuring? Yeah. And they're like, what do you mean?
Yeah, this is a challenge, and it's still a challenge. We still have not got a definitive test on what high nutrient dense means? What
I
does it
know.
mean?
And so
Can
I
you
was
give me
getting
a
them.
label? Can you give me a ratio of 1 to 10 or something? We don't
Yeah.
have that. We don't have
So
that. That would be so helpful, really, for the buyer and the shopper, because we can talk about all kinds of rules and regulations and how to change agriculture. But I'll tell you one thing that changed it faster than anything is the marketplace. And if people aren't buying what you grow, let me tell you, you're not going to agree. On the other hand, if they're demanding and say they will buy more and pay more for something grown in a certain way that has a certain proven value, and they're willing to pay for that extra value, then watch the farmers adapt to that very quickly. They'll be standing in line to learn how to do it. And that's what we're trying to be in a position to be ready for when that gets figured out. And it's not
yeah,
figured
I
out
mean,
yet, but that's what
do
I
you
see the
really think
future.
you went organics, you get a premium for organics? There's a lot of farmers I've worked with that are not certified organic, but really take care of the environment
Yeah.
and can prove that they have better infiltration, they have cleaner water,
Yeah.
all these things. They have better ecological services on their soil. Truthfully, nobody really wants to pay for that.
But what they will pay for, I think, is higher nutrition. And it doesn't matter how you get that. All the people you're working with, I am sure if we had a nutritional test of some kind that was easy and replicable and not too expensive, you'd find that they were producing high nutrient dense food. And that's what we should be paid for, I think. That's the value. And there may be several roads to Rome in this case, and nutrition, and it doesn't matter so much how you get there. But if we could figure out a way to categorize that and label that in a way that really is meaningful and reproducible, you do. And then you have the absence of minuses, like even the processing. The farmers can do all the best job in the world. And then what if it's processed and added some coloring agents or something that actually are a detriment? So we need to have a way to give credit for people that are doing the right thing and warn people about things that are not right and a detriment to us. There's a big fight about hydroponic, for example, but wonder if we could show that hydroponic done in a way that a lot of it's done is producing food with very low nutrition, for example, and have that on the label. Who would buy that compared to a similar product that is high nutrient dense with whatever's in it that makes it nutrient dense? I think that would be an easy solution to that, rather than just fighting which is better and which is not with just a bunch of platitudes.
So in that case, you've really talked about systems, like growing systems. And that whole idea of measuring nutrition is what Audacious does. My big goal, though, in all of this is to be able to connect what's in the food with how we've grown it so that we can all grow it in a better way, effectively.
That's the end. That's exactly the goal we should be striving for. I agree 100% with that.
Because we can have all the genetically modified food and we can pump all the chemicals on it. And honestly, I could fertilize the heck out of something and have it all nutritious.
Yeah.
But does that serve the ultimate purpose of actually helping the planet too? Because I believe that everything is connected.
Yes.
So I'm a proponent of the Gaia theory and Gaia, and I believe that all of this is connected. Everything we do is connected. And so for me, I can create really nutritious food, but sometimes that's not in a really good way that is consistent with the integrity of the environment. So for me, I think it's really important that there's some way that the nutritional outcome is connected with how somebody's growing it, just like certified organic, but certified organic with that regenerative aspect to it, where it says, okay, I'm also really taking care of the environment at the same time. And I don't want it, I guess for me, I believe that one size fits no one.
I don't agree with that. I think one size at least fits someone. Hopefully,
okay. I like that.
But one size doesn't fit all. That's the problem. And that's been the prescriptive idea that we get a prescription and it fits everybody. It might not fit no one, but it might only fit one. That's why I don't know. There's a lot of research right now trying to understand what really is nutrient dense. And there's a lot of folks testing for different aspects of that. And what we saw with the studies, it was quite enlightening on one hand, but frustrating on the other, because we saw these difference, but we had no way to explain it. We had We had done an analysis of the Kamut grain compared to the modern wheat, really wasn't that different. And then it got me thinking, wonder if it's a combination of things we're actually not looking at with secondary metabolites plants. And you've gone into that more than most, but still it's a hit and miss, and we don't know exactly how they are acting in concert with one another, or if one is low or one is high. Is that the same as being absent altogether or in abundance or whatever? And I was thinking, why don't we see if we can have a living system like a cell culture that would indicate not how it's going on, but what's going on. So we can say that you can put in a piece of food or a plant or whatever you're dealing with, or an end product, and then you could measure anti-inflammatory reactions, antioxidant reactions. We were looking at doing cell cultures with gut cells so we could look at tight junctions, which is also
leaky gut, right?
Leaky gut is a huge problem and causes other problems that really wouldn't be problems in the cell if the gut was tight the way it's supposed to be. Right. So we have these kinds of things that are all playing in ways that it's so complex, it's really hard to understand. But if we could have a living system that we could at least get an index.
Like a bioassay.
Yes, exactly. We don't need to understand exactly what's going on, but we understand what the end result is. And so this is either a good result or a bad result. So we go back to how we got there. How was it grown? How was it processed? What kind of seeds were used? All the kind of things you've been talking about too. And you could demonstrate that. And that's what I think would be very excited about.
Yeah, I agree. And part of this is about whole foods, right?
Yes.
Like, I read the studies, and everybody talks about how important it is to eat whole foods, because now I'll go back to my roots, how we can analyze the DNA and we can look at all the microbial communities in and around the roots, and we can identify some of them, not even close to all of them. But the thing about it is that there's all these helper molecules, and there's all these helper bacteria. We don't know what they do. We just know that if I don't have this whole community, it doesn't work.
That's right.
And I don't even know who the whole community is.
That's right.
We have them.
That's true.
It's like when you're birding. Oh, that's a little brown bird.
That's it.
I think it's the same thing. You're just like, oh, okay, I know I need the whole thing. And I think part of that is, and I think about it now as a plant physiologist, we know the genome, but we don't know about all the bioactive compounds that plants produce.
That's exactly right.
It constantly changes. It's dynamic.
Yes.
Breaking them down, and they're reconfiguring them all the time.
And if they're under attack,
they could be doing it hourly or minutely.
Yeah, that's right. And if they're under attack, they're making new ones that never existed before to help with whatever the attack is. But it's a constant flux. But in the end, it all comes together to make an end product that's either better or not as good. And we can help modulate that. That's what's exciting to me, because the more we understand it, the more we can say, okay, we'll try this or that.
We can manage. My thing is, I can manage soils. I can use plants, and I can manage soils so that our whole foods are really, that they work.
Yeah.
And whether or not we know exactly how they work.
Yeah.
So it's like maybe a bioassay is good enough and go plus or minus. No, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And then when you're doing experiments like you are at the Institute, you can say, okay, this one, no, I see that with, actually, Dean Ho does studies at the University at Singapore. He's a biomedical engineer. And he was talking about small experiments like that, where you just take all the data together and then you start looking at it and going, okay, what works, what doesn't work, what dose would work, what dose doesn't work. How would we combine these doses? And in many ways, he's working mostly on chemotherapy, or was. But he was getting, people were becoming well with less chemical, with less dose, with lower doses, and mixing them up. Okay, we'll put this one first and this one second. And these kinds of things. And then a few years ago, I was at a couple of meetings out at Piscine's Ranch, hosted by Sally Calhoun, where we talked about where doctors were coming in to look at how we were doing things, like to learn about soil health and whatnot. And that was really interesting, because in California, in places like the Alameda Clinic, they were actually had food pharmacy, and California actually allows them to write prescriptions, and they get like a voucher for fresh food.
That's great.
Yeah. And I know that Jimmy Emmons was talking that they're doing something like that in Oklahoma. So these things are cropping up all over the place with the food deserts and people not getting enough really good fresh food. They're actually providing it and providing them extra funds in order to get it. I think that's the model we want to pursue. But then it's up to us as
Yeah.
growers to be growing this great food.
But we should also be compensated for that, like anyone else who does a job. If you do it well, you should be compensated well. And if we could devise a way to pay farmers for nutrients per acre rather than tons per acre, wouldn't that be a cool thing?
Cool thing.
And then but we have to understand what we're doing. And someday we'll understand what these things are going on, but there's so much we don't understand, but we do understand the direction we want to go, I think. And I think that's really important, that we make some progress in that direction. And I think we're starting to understand quite clearly directions we don't want to go in. And so we can say, okay, that's not the right direction. And I think that we have enough knowledge to get started. And we don't have to have the whole picture figured out, but we can encourage the good directions that we understand and discourage the bad directions that we're starting to also understand.
Temple Grandin once said to me, she goes, "It seems to me, Jill, that we know a lot about what is not soil health."
Yeah. Yes.
And we recognize what is soil health, but we don't know a lot about it. So why don't we just go with this is not soil health and this is soil health?
Yeah.
Simple.
Yes. No wonder she's authority.
I love how she just drills down into those.
Yeah.
Yeah. And why didn't you think of that? And you're like, yeah, don't know. Too caught up in all the details and whatnot. But let's go back to offering a place-based approach to solving national food and health crises.
Okay.
And why don't you tell us a little bit? We know that you did a lot of studies with Kamut International that really got you started and down the path to food as medicine.
Yeah.
What experiments are you doing now? And where are you going with the Institute?
An experience I had at the food show, Jill, I should share with you, that really changed also the way I look at my farm. Is I was standing in the booth selling Kamut at the time, but this lady came up to me just right out of the blue, and she shook my hand real forcefully, looked right into my eyes and said, "Thank you for growing food for my family." I thought, wow.
Oh.
No, I've never heard anything like that before. A wheat farmer in Montana never sees their end customer. We don't even think about growing wheat as a food. We think about it as a commodity. And everything is commodity, as commodity market, as commodity everything. And I had, of course, I was selling Kamut as a food. I was looking at the markets. But
you have delicious snacks. I love them.
I know. But when I went home, my whole farm, I didn't think about wheat. That's how I thought about it. After that experience, I went home and I never grew another commodity ever on my farm ever again. The only thing I'm growing on my farm now is food. And that's food that is healthy and contributes to people's vitality and their good health. And it's just a mental switch of how to look at stuff. So now I'm looking at more than just wheat. We're looking at vegetables. Montana's not a place where you think you can grow vegetables, but actually we can grow vegetables. The homesteaders all had gardens and they all grew vegetables and they were pretty self-sufficient, but we can't grow everything. We can't. In dry land, it's been my experience, we can't grow lettuce and we can't grow Swiss chard and that sort of stuff it's mostly a leafy vegetable and doesn't have a big root system, but we can do very well with things that might surprise me. Tomatoes, we can't grow the big gigantic ones, but we can grow the medium-sized ones and the small ones just fine.
Tomatoes, more wild type.
Yeah, and we can grow onions and we can grow squash and we can grow watermelons. I was in Israel one time and my friend who's guiding me around says, "We have a watermelon that grows in the desert." And I said, "Oh, I have a desert." And so I was able to get some seeds. And by golly, this watermelon just grows fine with no water other than the 12 to 14 inches of rain we get. I have to spread those plants about 3 times further apart than what we would in your garden or what they can do in Ohio or Iowa, where they don't even water their lawns, for heaven's sakes. But when you do that, it gives them enough space. And when I started doing all the research and calculations and that, it dawned on me that the space they needed was about 3 times more than normal. And when you compare our rainfall with theirs, with the Midwest, where they're not irrigating normally. And so I thought, well, for heaven's sakes, why can't I figure this out without doing all these experiments? So we're past that. But now we are doing things like promoting dryland vegetables in a region that we could supplement, at least have some basis for our diet. Not that we replace everything we brought in, But when you look at what's going on in California, how much longer is the water going to last there when they're fighting over the water with the cities on all the time? I don't think we can look at California for feeding the whole country anymore. And we need to get in a position where we can, region by region, be in a better position to feed ourselves. And that's what we're going to be doing. We are also taking the idea that Kamut is a spring grain. Now we're looking at winter wheat, and we're looking at hard white winter wheat. So one of the other things you talked about, whole foods. Wheat is, and I'm most familiar with wheat. I'm a wheat farmer in the beginning.
Yeah.
And so what do they do with wheat? They make white flour out of it. What's white flour? That's what you get when you peel off the bran and the germ and you feed it to the pigs. That is about 1/3 of the kernel. And so the pigs are eating better than we are because that's all full of minerals and vitamins and all kinds and fiber and antioxidants that helps your digestion and your whole body and all this stuff. And we're feeding it to the pigs. But yet people are reluctant. Most of our bread wheats are red wheats. That means the bran has a very dark red color. And it also imparts a little bit of bitterness and sometimes to the end product. So people add sugar or honey or whatever to help with that. If you start with a white wheat and you make that in the flour, it's not near as dark. It produces bread that's tannish and is a lot more easy for kids to start to eat, but it's not so dark and the adults too. Therefore, you're not throwing away the third that you throw away with a white flour to make white bread. We have tan bread that's made with whole wheat, but it's whole white wheat. So we're experimenting with that. And we started with 100 different wild types from Turkey. So we know they're ancient grains too. So they've never been messed with for their genetics.
So these are Aegean wheats? Are they Aegean wheats?
Yeah, they're all from wheat. It originated in Mesopotamia. So generally in that part of the world, that was the origin of wheat. So they're coming from that basic area where it was first originated. But there are all so many different kinds, Jill. In Montana, we grow probably 8 or 10 that are the most prevalent ones and probably make up 90% of what's grown. And most of the big wheat states, that's the same thing. It's very narrow in what we grow. And so what I'm doing, I'm not doing so much breeding. You gave me a little credit for a big plant breeder in the beginning. I'm not really a breeder. I'm a seeker and finder. And so my idea is to see what's out there already and pick things that already have good qualities. And if we need to put a little insect resistance into them or something like that, I don't have a big problem with that. But I do have a big problem if they're going to take all of these changes and modify things so much that now we have something that people can't eat without trouble. And so we're looking for things that we don't have to modify and see what kind of luck we can find. So we started with 100 different selections from the seed bank or the small grains collection in Idaho. About 65 of those fell over. They were too tall and fell over and lodged here in Montana. And so we couldn't harvest them. So we kicked them out right away. So we had a little over 30. And then we started whittling them down to uniformity. And we did some bake tests and whatnot. Even though these are supposed to be all hard red wheat samples, we found 15 cases where there were some white kernels in those samples. Because they weren't pure, they just collected out in the wild. So they weren't exactly pure lines. They didn't start with a single head. They start with a group of heads, probably. Anyway, we picked out just the white kernels. And last year we had 15 different varieties, lines that we were planting. Even all of those were not pure. We compared all the heads and we ended up with about 22, 23 that were different looking. And so now we've sent those to Arizona to grow out headlines over the winter so that they're uniform. And then we'll start over comparing those. But even the ones that we compared so far, we found great differences. Out of those 15, we picked 6 that really had nice baking characteristics. We're really primarily looking at flavor and aromas because those are connected with, you have flavors and aromas due to polyphenols and other secondary metabolites in plants. And those secondary metabolites, by and large, are really responsible for anti-inflammatory properties, anti-oxidation properties, and that sort of thing. And so they're very much tied, even though we don't have a real foolproof method of nutrient assessment. The rule of thumb is if it tastes good and smells good, it probably is good.
Yeah.
So that was the rule people lived by for thousands of years. And they made selections on that. But isn't it interesting that those kinds of things and making selections based on that actually was producing a higher and higher nutritional value to what they ended up with? And so that's what we're trying to go back to a little bit.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. And if we have something that nutritionally has good aroma and good flavors, and one yields 25 bushel, one yields 50, we're going to pick up the one that is 50. But if they're like 40 and 50, or if they're close, we'll probably mix them. At the end, we'll make a mixture. We're not looking for the one variety or the one line that does all this. And so if you can make a population and mix together different things that make a really good end product, I think this is a better way to go. And this is where we're really shooting for this hard white wheat project.
So I'm just going to go back for people who might not have understood exactly some of that. When you found the grains that were white, did you grow them out separately from?
Yes, picks. So I took them into my local Rotary Club, and I offered to buy a $25 ticket on something that was going on by another Rotary Club on a chance, a big drawing or something.
Yeah.
If they would pick out 1 cup full of white kernels for me. And it was really amazing, Jill. The ranges on those 15 were 25. The lowest was like 22% white, but the highest was like 93%. The guys that got the 90 sacks, they thought it was a really good deal because they could pick out white kernels pretty fast. But the ones who only had to pick out 1 kernel and 5 was white, because it was in the 20s, they felt they had done poorly by.
So they were thinking they needed to buy 2 tickets.
I gave them 2 tickets. But what we tried to do is then purify the white kernels, or select for the white kernels, and then just plant white kernels this last.
But then the white kernels.
There were some of my helpers, they weren't all white. Some put in some red kernels, and we were able to distinguish those. But that's why we decided to go now with some single heads and planting those out, because if you really, they're not going to change from white to red. The genetics are in there and set, but it's very hard not to get them mixed up. So you have to be very careful and pick out kernels one by one, or pick out the heads one by one, so that they don't contaminate then the next year's seeding. So that's where we are now, is purifying those lines. And then we'll do the bake test on individual pure lines, but then at the end, we'll combine the best lines into a population. That makes sense.
I just wanted to make sure that some of the people who might be watching this or listening to it understood more about the process of how you make those selections and then how you grow them out. Because it's really important, because this is basic. Yeah. This is how people have done it for thousands of years, selecting based on the characteristics they want and doing that. Now with the white wheat then, so that means that I can have a whole wheat loaf that doesn't look like brown bread.
In fact, a couple of the samples the flour had a yellowish tinge. And that's a little bit like the Kamut. But this is hard white winter wheat, and it's a bread type of wheat. And when you bake that into bread and cut the loaves, they were golden. Wow. Lovely. Okay, this is what we're looking for. This is even better. And we sent those away for nutritional analysis. And as you know, that the golden color probably indicates that there's higher maybe vitamin E or vitamin A, which are both yellowish. Yeah. So this could be great. We haven't got the results back yet, but we're already starting to be able then by color to differentiate maybe some higher nutritional values.
Oh, that'd be great. So that's an example of one of the studies you're doing.
Yeah.
I know you're doing more studies than just that.
How many days do we have to talk now?
No, that was a lot of in-depth on that one.
I didn't mean to go
on the other ones.
Okay.
So tell us more about some of the other studies.
All right. If people are familiar with the Northern Great Plains, and particularly Shortgrass Prairie, where we have only 12, 14 inches of rain, it's all alkaline soils. It means there's a lot of salt also in the soil. And we have a phenomenon called saline seep. And saline seep occurs when water falls in a high spot, maybe a sandy knoll of a hilltop or something, goes underground, and then hits an impervious layer like clay, which is then forced back up to the surface. And it carries with it all these dissolved salts. And when it gets to the surface, it evaporates. It comes to the surface, makes the surface wet and muddy, and then the water evaporates, but it leaves behind all these salts. And you get a big white area called the alkali spot, or salt spot, or salt lick, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, nothing grows there. And you can aggravate that by how you farm. And summer fallow is the worst thing you can do by not growing a crop around those areas, because it aggravates the amount of water then that comes down and then goes back up and leaves that salt deposit. Right. So one of the ways we can solve that is surrounded by alfalfa. The alfalfa brings out the water so it doesn't hit the breakout area and leave all those salt behind, so that it is used up by the plants. So we have an experiment this year using different types of hemp. Now, some fiber hemp goes up 8 or 10 feet tall, and it's an enormous plant. With different types of hemp, take out more water and solve the saline seeps quicker than alfalfa, because alfalfa takes years and years to work. So we used 3 different types of hemp. We had a seed type, a multi-purpose type, and a fiber type. And we found that the grasshoppers moved in. They didn't destroy everything, but they came in and they worked on stuff that was still green after everything else went dry. And the nice thing about hemp is it stays green a long time as far as using water up. But they ate up the dual purpose hemp immediately, and it didn't even flower or seed, produce seed.
Wow.
And the seed hemp, then after that was gone, then they went to the seed hemp. And by that time it was starting to flower. So the seed hemp has some seeds on it, but the leaves are all gone by the middle of August.
Yeah.
And after
So
that was
the
oil seed, yes, for oil
Yeah.
seeds. And so that's called seed hemp. And then we have the fiber hemp that's used, well, to make fiber clothes.
ropes. Used to be grown in
ropes.
Malta, Montana for ropes, jute ropes.
That's right. And all the ropes were made with hemp in those days. But anyway, that was very interesting that the grasshoppers came into that patch at the very end. So it was still growing in September, and almost the end of September, it was still growing. And it went into the seep further than those other 2, and even further than alfalfa. Alfalfa's not very salt tolerant. It doesn't grow into the salt area at all. There's only a few plants that do, like kochia, like some weeds, some grasses, foxtail grass, some things, they're salt tolerant a little bit.
Yeah.
But this fiber hemp also has some salt tolerance. So we were quite excited about this first year's results. We'll just plant fiber hemp now next year and see what it can do as far as a long-term effect on this saline seed. So that's another example of what we're trying to do.
And fiber hemp has a number of allelopathic properties and very deep roots.
Yeah.
And it really was adapted to the northern Great Plains because most of the ropes came from northern Montana along the High Line with Canada.
Yeah.
And most people don't know that, but it was a big crop during the Second World War for people in Montana.
Yeah, fell out of favor.
Yeah.
Had a bad rap.
Yeah, that one right now.
No, but it just goes to show you how one problem that's a perfect example of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Because and then now we're trying to come back and say, okay, what are the positive things, and let's focus on those. So that's pretty interesting.
So you talked about earlier about how important it was to be in nature's image, like to work with nature. And if we think about the prairie, a lot of those grasses were really deep rooted, which meant that we didn't have the saline seeps because we had roots growing down. We had a lot of photosynthesis. We had a lot of transpiration because we actually had most of the ground covered by things that were actually transpiring. And we had a lot more organic matter. And we had deep organic matter that was preventing that from happening. We did some experiments like that in the Palouse Prairie too, where we were growing sunflowers and safflowers together because sunflowers have those big leaves, so they act as water pumps. And so again, just building up the transpiration. And we found that after 3 years, we just kept moving in. And after each year, we could move in a little farther and a little farther. And in 3 years, we had pretty much finished with the seep. So that's another thing to try because I know that you can grow safflower really well.
Yes, and we've done that too, and that's a good idea. And so what we also have learned is that once the seep is under control, never summer fallow or chem fallow or anything, not chem fallow, but always grow a crop, because in 1 year that seep, if it's in an area where it can come back, it will come back. And so that's a really important lesson we learned in the past. But we have seen small alkali spots in neighboring pastures, but they're very small, Jill, and you can just step across them. And the cows use them for a salt lick. So they do perform an important function, but they are not a destruction to the plant life of the whole prairie or the whole field.
Natural part of the prairie.
That's right. They're part of the natural system. They're an important part for animals that need a salt lick on the prairie, and that's what they were used for.
Yeah. Okay. And so are there any projects that you want to do in the
we're just starting some work with composting and compost extracts, and people have talked about compost for years and years. And so when you look at the prairie and you've got thousands of acres, there's no way we can go out and compost all that. But there's been some ideas coming out of Utah, and they had some studies, and this is an extension. We got a grant with Utah State University and the University of Wyoming to look at dryland grain production with one-time application of compost. So the idea is that you put a fairly substantial amount of compost on one time, and then you look at what happens for the next 10 years. So the grant's only for 4, but we're going to continue on and just see anyway, because what they've seen in Utah is lingering effects for 10 years. That's huge, Jill. And then that means that you don't have to put compost on every year, but if you put it on, if you have a source, and if you have cattle or dairy or something nearby, and again, a lot of those sources, especially with industrial ag, a lot of those sources are just a liability. They're not an asset, and they're causing trouble instead of
That's a product.
instead of being utilized in a way that they could be an asset. So we have a friend of mine has a lot in town in Big Sandy on the edge of town where he is just overwintering his heifers. So they're being fed mostly Timothy and a little alfalfa, and they have some straw for bedding. So they're not getting any hormones, they're not getting anything that would go into that manure that you wouldn't want to put on the soil. So that's going to be my source. But if you take raw manure and you make compost out of it, you increase it way better than I do the value of that as a soil nutrient. Yeah, a huge increase in value. So that's what we're going to start doing. That's one of the projects I'm quite excited about, of just getting started in and seeing how we can utilize, especially if you have some in the neighborhood, utilize some of the neighborhood resources in ways that are now just being discarded.
Yeah, we can look just north of the border for you, because when I was working with Ag Canada, we actually did some of those studies where in our organic study, we actually put compost and manure on fields, and every 3rd year. We had a point where we put manure on, and there are rules about when you can spread manure and things like that, but we didn't incorporate it because as I like to keep the soil undisturbed as much as possible.
Sure,
And it worked really well. And it is. One thing about it is alfalfa roots, anything woody, and I don't mean wood chips, because wood chips can actually bind nutrients, and they really cause a lot of microbial immobilization of nutrients from plants. But manure gives you organic matter, gives you a source of organic matter. It also, the nutrients leak through it, and you get the microbes too if you do it right. And you just need, there's another thing too that we played with in the Pacific Northwest was pelleted manure.
Yeah.
And then you can put it in furrow with the seed, and then it's like a sponge and a whole bunch of nutrients. And it really, the microbes have to work to break it down and get the nutrients, and so do the roots. And it really creates a really active, a rhizosphere community in there. And pellets are hard to make. So there's that other aspect of pellet mills and things like that, but they can be, the thing about it is then you're not spreading something, you're actually putting it in furrow. And I think that's another way of doing things. But I thought about this, and I thought, the other thing that I noticed you talked about was like green leaves. The one thing we can grow is quinoa, right? Because, well, lamb's quarters is a big time leaf.
And I know that they've done some in Alberta. We haven't really looked at that. I have
because in Idaho, I know a number of growers that were growing it. I grew it for a little bit. I have to tell you, because I was like, there's no reason I can't grow quinoa, because man, I got lamb's quarters coming out my ears.
What's the rest of the story?
And so I grew these varieties, but I did think enough about it to grow like blue ones and red ones.
Yeah.
Because when you're weeding, you can't tell. That's the biggest problem. But then I asked myself, is there anything really wrong with eating lamb's quarters?
Well, we eat them all the time when they're little, and the leaves are quite yummy. Can you? I haven't harvested any on purpose.
But then I did harvest a bunch of them, not on purpose. They were all mixed in, and we couldn't tell the difference for the most part.
And did your buyer, did they care?
Well, no, because I harvested it all and nobody noticed. But I think it's a bit smaller than, you know, they bred quinoa for the larger grain. So I think it's a bit smaller, but that's another thought, because you can eat the leaves of quinoa just like chard. Chard's another quinopodium.
Yes. Well, that's one of the purposes that we want to have our institute for, Jill, is to look at all different types of typically new or unusual crops that might have a good home for us on the Northern Great Plains.
So I want you to talk about your school project. the community.
Oh, what you mean my potato project?
That's about community.
Yes, okay. So in our town, we have a group of ranchers who've come together and decided that the meat that the kids would come home and complain about the meat at school, in the school lunches. And they said, how come this doesn't taste like ours, Dad, that we have on our table? And so you can answer that question yourself.
Yeah.
Because they're buying the cheapest meat they can find. Like most of the things in America are cheap. The nutrition is not there. The taste is not there. All kinds of things are not there, but you don't have to pay much for it. So they said, why don't we donate our cull cows, the cows that are coming in the fall and not pregnant, so they don't want to keep them over the winter because they're not going to produce a calf the next year. But they've been on grass all year, and some of them are older, so they don't make nice steaks, but they make nice hamburger. And so they got together with a butcher shop in southern Montana near Livingston, and were able to have all these cull cows butchered for free, made in a hamburger, returned to the school, and now their kids are eating high quality meat at the school lunch program. And you can taste it. And just as we talked about earlier, that the taste and the flavors really are an indication of the quality of nutrition you're eating. And so they're really excited about that. I haven't grown cows or had cows on my farm or run cattle for about 30 years because when I started going to food shows in the winter, my wife in a very kind way said, honey, I'm not going to be feeding these cows while you're gone. Nor am I going out and pulling calves if they start having trouble in their birthing process. I said, okay, that's a fair request. So the cows went down the road and I rented out my pastures to the neighbors. We haven't had any cattle since. We want to get them back now as part of the whole picture on the Institute, but we haven't had those. I wasn't involved in this project, but they asked me to come and help organize the logistics and everything and how to organize a nonprofit and everything they wanted to form and that sort of stuff. And I said, why don't we add potatoes to this mix so we can at least have meat and potatoes for our kids? And I said, I'll grow the potatoes for you. So this year we planted, about 1,000 of potato plants. So it wasn't a huge quarter of an acre or something. And it wasn't a big lot, but we planted 4 different varieties that I found they were quite successful in dry land. And then I have some friends in southern Montana near the Yellowstone River at Gray Cliff Mills that have a team of horses and an old potato digger. And they said they'd be willing to come up and dig the potatoes. And I invited out kindergarten through 6th grade from the grade school to come out and watch the potatoes being dug with the horses. They had a couple of Frisian draft horses, and the kids they went honkers over it. They'd never seen that kind of stuff before.
Oh, beautiful horses.
And it was great fun. And then after the potatoes were dug, the kids went out and picked all those potatoes and put them in crates, which we then put in our root cellar. And then we've been taking them into school every couple of weeks. And so now the kids get to enjoy the fruit of their labors, and they get to see where their food comes from. And they get to see a little bit of the effort that goes into it. It just doesn't appear by magic in the store or on your plate. Somebody spends a lot of time and a lot of effort to do this, but they can take pride in having been a part of it. And we've had really great responses and reports back for that. In fact, you can go on krtv.com and type in Bob Quinn and you'll see the news reel.
I'll make sure
I will have to do that.
And we'll make a link to it. What strikes me is what's going to happen now. They go home and they go, Dad, the meat tastes pretty good, but the potatoes at home just don't taste any good.
Yeah, especially if they're coming from potato flakes.
And so they're like, so what are we doing about that?
But I've already gotten complaints with parents that said, how come my kids want to come out and help you pick your potatoes? So the grass always looks greener on their side.
Oh, yeah.
I had the same experience growing up.
Oh, yeah. It's always the same thing. This has been, we've got we've gone overtime here because but I want to thank you for coming on to Tasting Terroir. And just I'll give a plug for the Quinn Institute, and we will make sure all the links are available to everybody if you want to donate or what the Quinn Institute is doing.
Neither of us are 20 anymore, but we've had a good time along the way. And I want to say thank you for all you've done. That's what I wanted to say.
I appreciate that. And I really appreciate what you've done too. And we'll put up all the links for the various things that we've done together as well, because we've done some really good nutritional work too early on about with wheats and understanding old wheats and new wheats.
You've been listening to Tasting Terroir. If you're a fan of our work, please consider buying us a coffee to help keep the show going. You can do that by clicking the link below and deciding on any amount you'd like to contribute. If you'd like to learn more about soil health, find upcoming soil health events, and helpful links that can help you to build your own healthy soil, please check out our website, rhizoterra.com. That's RHIZOTERRA.com. If you're interested in having Dr. Jill Clapperton speak at your event or conduct a soil health workshop, please get in touch at jillclapperton.com.